thank everybody for coming out today to learn about the Refuge, the domestic violence services, and the sexual assault services that we have. I'm Betty Williams. I'm the director of the Refuge. The Refuge Domestic Violence Shelter, we are funded by the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council out of Atlanta, Georgia. We are also a United Way funded agency. The domestic violence shelter, we cover Toombs, Montgomery, Wheeler, Truitland, and Emmanuel counties. The sexual assault center covers the same 5 counties with Candler and Tatnall. We have a crisis line, and it is 24/7. It is 538-9935. Some of the services that we offer at the shelter, of course, is the emergency shelter. Now, when the women and children come into our shelter, they usually come with just the clothes that they're wearing. And so we provide clothing, we provide all the food, we provide school supplies for the children, medicines, anything that they need while they're at the shelter, we're able to provide all that. Another one of the services that we give is legal advocacy. A lot of people do not need to come into our shelter, but they do want a temporary protective order. So we have a legal advocate, and she helps with all the paperwork. She contacts the judge to let the judge know that we have a client that needs an order. She sets up the appointment, and she goes with her to get that temporary protective order signed. We have support groups, not just for the women, but we also have support groups for the children as well. If you will look on here, you will see one of the things that the child advocate does for the children. They do some drawings because we know that the children like to express themselves by drawing. So this was a little boy. He was age 7. And you can see that his drawing was about his dad. And he said that is what makes him sad, is his dad. With domestic violence, all the violence is different, but one thing that is not is about the power and control. So you can see on the cycle of violence the outside of the wheel. And that is what most people think of when they think about domestic violence. They think of the physical abuse. But domestic violence is much more than just the physical. You can see isolation, emotional abuse, economic, sexual, use in the children, threats. There's all different forms of domestic violence. Now with that, every one of them is just as deadly as the physical. And this is a girl that came into our shelter. She was actually a student here at STC. When she called the crisis line, she told us he had never physically abused her. But she told us what he told her he would do to her. He would tell her that if you leave with the children, I will cut you up in pieces. I will shoot you. I will do this and that. And every once in a while, he would get the gun out and play with it in front of her. He would get a machete out and play with it in front of her. And she knew he was serious, so she and her children came into shelter. Everyone's situation is different. Because Allison was working her case plan, she was coming to school, she was just very close to graduating from here. And when a lady leaves a domestic violence situation, that is the most dangerous time for her. So, when she left, she was in danger, but then she decided to get a temporary protective order. That is another dangerous time because he is losing that power and that control. So he lost the power and control when she left. He was losing the power and control when she got the temporary protective order. And then she decided she was going to divorce. So they went to the courthouse in Montgomery County. The judge signed the order, and that day he looked at her and told her, I'll get you, I'll kill you. He ended up killing her, but he never laid a hand on her before that. So if someone comes to you and they tell you that they're afraid for their life, and you say, well, what did he do to you? And she says, well, he said he was going to do, this or that. It is just as dangerous as if he had beaten her. I want you to always remember that. Let her know that there's help available. The refuge is here for her. Some of the warning signs for women who are in domestic violence. Let's say you have a friend, and she is usually so outgoing. She's the life of the party. And then all of a sudden, she quits coming to the events. All of a sudden, she quits being that bubbly person she used to be. You invite her to things and she can't go. Or she says, no, I'm going to be with Bill tonight. And everything is about Bill. The life in her eyes are gone. And that's really a telltale. You can look in someone's eyes and you can see when there's no life, when there's no joy. So if she changes drastically from the person she used to be, let's say it's summer, and she's wearing long sleeve shirts, she's wearing turtleneck, that's usually a sign also. If she's at work and he is constantly calling her or texting her, that is also a sign of domestic violence. You can just say to her, honey, I'm concerned about you. Is everything okay? And then a lot of times she's going to say, yes, everything's okay. You can say, well, if it's not, I know of a place that can help you. Let her know you're there for her. And when she's ready, she will come to you. Now this is one of my favorite, because this is what batterers usually look like in front of law enforcement. They are just, everything is great in the neighborhood. I want you to think about Gabby. I'm sure all of you have seen the video. She is the one that's hysterical. She's the one that can't pull it together with law enforcement. But he's got it all together. He's just explaining. And if you'll think about Gabby, she took ownership of the domestic violence. It was her fault. It was this. It was that. And that's what most victims do because of what she's been threatened with. If you say anything to the police, this is what I'm going to do to you. And they do, a lot of times, he'll say, she's going through a mental issue. She's crazy. She's this. And a lot of times that's what she looks like when police get there. But it's because of what she's been through that she's acting that way. But this is what batterers really are like at home. And always remember this, no one knows what goes on behind closed doors. No one knows it. There's someone that I know that's very near and dear to me. She lived in domestic violence for 20 plus years. She was the wife of a Southern Baptist preacher. She put on a mask every Sunday and every Wednesday night with this happy smile on her face. He beat her severely. She had broken bones, but she put that mask on. Everyone in the church adored this pastor. They had no clue. So, again, if someone tells you they're in domestic violence, don't say, there's no way. He would never, ever do that to her. You don't know what is going on behind closed doors. LaShonda, she was one of our clients, and we always want to remember her. She left our shelter. She was very successful for a while, but she got back in another relationship, and he ended up killing her as well. And we always want to remember LaShonda, which we called her January. She worked at Shoney's here in Vidalia. In Georgia, from October of 2020 through September of 21, 144 Georgians lost their lives to domestic violence. We are very thankful that we did not have anyone from our service area that was killed, but we always want to remember the 144. Now, the one thing about these 144, they're from all age groups. They're all races. They're male and they're female. So you can see with domestic violence, it does not discriminate. It doesn't care your income. It doesn't care your occupation. Domestic violence reaches all realms. With safety planning, I'm not going to go over all these, but one thing that you do want to let them know is never, ever, ever let the abuser know that you're leaving. If you're getting ready to leave that relationship, there's steps that you need to take. Have her to call the Refuge. Let us go over some safety planning, because once the abuser realizes he's getting ready to lose that power and control, then that's when it escalates. I'm going to turn it over to Heather Williams. She is our sexual assault coordinator, and she's going to take it from here.
Thank you. All right, my turn. It's so good to see you. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for the people who are joining us online. Hope that you come away with some good information today and learn something new. Maybe not for you. Maybe this is for a family member. Maybe this is for a friend of yours. I can tell you that this is information that one day will likely touch you if it hasn't already, or touch somebody that you know. And we want you to know what the resources are. We want you to know how to get in touch with us. We want you to know how serious these things can be. So statistics, let's talk about some numbers. You may think this is something that's never going to touch me, this is never going to touch somebody who I know. But statistically, we know that 1 in 5 women in the United States have experienced or will experience some form of sexual abuse or sexual harassment. About half of female victims and about 40% about half are abused by an intimate partner and 40% by an acquaintance. So the whole myth of the people that rape, it usually happens, in a dark alley in the middle of the night by a guy who comes up behind you with a mask on. That's sensationalizing the whole situation. That's not real life. Real life tells us that the majority of our victims know their abuser. And statistically, we know that this also affects men. So at the Sexual Assault Center, we have had victims who are female. We have had victims that are male. At our center in town, we serve victims who are 12 years old and up. If they're younger than 12, we have a child advocacy center in town in all of our service area that we would refer that person to. We work very closely with our law enforcement officers and with our hospitals and our medical professionals in town. And all throughout our service area, and we make sure that we get them to the resource that they need. So if it's not us, we don't just say, I'm sorry, we can't help you. We're going to put them in touch with somebody who can. So this does touch males and females as well. At the Refuge, so we have the domestic violence shelter, which is at an undisclosed location for the safety and security of the women and children that stay there. However, we have a sexual assault center. Our first exam was done in February of 2019. And we want everybody to know where we are. We're on Jackson Street. We're right across the street from the library, right beside Mimosa Boutique, if you know where that is. Very easy to find. You don't have to go to the hospital if you've been a victim of sexual assault. You don't have to contact law enforcement. You can come directly to our center. We've had victims knock on our door and say, I think I need to speak with somebody. We are physically there 8 to 4, Monday through Friday. I have nurses and advocates on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So if we aren't physically in the building, you can still call the crisis number, which is the same crisis number for the domestic violence shelter. We try to make it easy, one number for both, and we'll get you in touch with the advocate that you need to speak with to help you. At the Rape Crisis Center, we have advocates. They're your buddy throughout the entire process. So they're with you from the very beginning, all the way through an exam if it's necessary, all the way through meeting with law enforcement, potentially going to court, going to trial. So our advocate, that's your best friend throughout this whole process. We have counselors. I'm a coordinator, and I'm also a SANE. So SANE stands for Sexual Assault Nurse Examiner. You also see the term SAFE, S-A-F-E, that's a Sexual Assault Forensic Examiner. It's basically the same thing. Those are RNs in the state of Georgia. You must be an RN to be a SANE. And they are specially trained in how to handle a sexual assault victim, how to speak to them, how to help them through the process, how to work with law enforcement and do a physical exam that is not only for the benefit primarily of the health and well-being of the victim, but also to aid law enforcement with the collection of evidence by doing a rape kit, by using swabs, and see if we can't get some DNA to help strengthen that case so that law enforcement can go further and prosecute and give them the evidence that they need to help support that case. In the medical exam, we make sure that we have consent. Our victims are in charge. I am not in charge as the nurse. Their parents, if they're 12 and up, their parents are not in charge. They cannot bring a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old to my office and say, my child has been sexually assaulted, I want them to have an exam. But the child says, no, I don't want to have an exam, and then we move forward. We don't do that. That's assault. I'm not going to do anything on a victim that they don't want us to do. And they can withdraw their consent at any time. So we could get halfway through and they can say, you know what, this is too much, I want to stop. And we stop. So the victim is always the one in charge. We're going to get a good history. We're going to find out what happened. Tell me what happened. Give me examples. Tell me words he said. And we typically say she as a victim and he as the offender because statistically speaking, that is the vast majority, although we do recognize that men are victims of both domestic violence and sexual assault as well. But for the purposes of teaching, we use he and she. She is the victim and he is the offender. So we make sure that we have a good idea of what happened. He grabbed my arms. Okay, he grabbed your arms. Where did he grab you? He pushed me down. Where did he push you? Did you fall onto the floor? Was there carpet? Was it hard floor? Was it wood? Was it cement? Did you hit your head? Did you scrape your elbow? Because that tells a nurse, because first and foremost, we are nurses, how do I need to examine my patient? How do I need to look at them and make sure that injuries that could have happened are identified and dealt with appropriately? Along with that goes the collection of potential DNA for the law enforcement. Injury identification, so we make sure that we look at all the areas, head to toe, top to bottom. We make sure that we identify any area that could potentially have been an injury from the assault. And then with the medical or the evidence collection. So we will collect swabs to hopefully get DNA off of their body. The victim's body at that time is considered a crime scene. So we treat it as such, and we help collect that evidence. So we're swabbing, potentially outside the body, potentially inside the body, to collect that evidence, to collect that DNA. We also know that sometimes drugs are involved, and it's called a drug-facilitated sexual assault. So maybe you've heard of somebody roofied her, somebody put something in her drink, and that does happen. We have had cases in our center where they have been given an illicit drug unknowingly in their drink, and they don't remember what happened, but they know that something physically happened. They woke up the next morning and they don't remember anything. They wake up the next morning and they don't know where they are. They don't know who they're laying beside. They don't know where their clothes are. So that's a tip to us that we need to look a little bit further. So we'll help law enforcement by collecting blood and urine and then send it to the GBI crime lab to figure out what were they drugged with. Medication administration. So we at the center, we do not test for sexually transmitted infections. However, we offer medication as if they have been exposed. So that's called prophylactically. Just in case you've been exposed, we have medication available in-house that we can offer to you if it's within a given time frame from the assault and to protect them. It adds a little layer of protection. So hopefully if they were ever exposed to anything during that assault, let's go ahead and take care of it before it even starts. We also offer Plan B. You've often heard of it called Plan B. You've heard of it maybe the morning after pill. So that's something that the medication and the morning after pill is something that's discussed between the victim and the nurse to determine is it appropriate and is it needed? Is it something that they want to participate in or not? And then documentation. We document everything. We document what the victim states. We're putting quotes. We're saying exactly what she says happened and exactly what we see. Do we see a discoloration? How big is it? We'll measure it. Where is it on the body? Does it hurt them? How much does it hurt them? What does it feel like? So we're documenting all of that, again, not just for the victim and to make sure that they are medically stable, but also for that case if it moves forward in court. This is the recommended time frame. So our golden hour is 120. 120 hours is our time frame that we really want to get that victim to the center. 120 hours post-assault, we start to lose the ability to collect DNA. It doesn't last on or in the body forever. So if it just happened a few hours ago and they're reporting it, they haven't showered, they haven't changed their clothes, that's the perfect time to get them from law enforcement or from the hospital to our center. We want to do all of our exams in our center. It is very victim friendly. It is not set up like a medical facility. It is very calming, very reassuring. We have big comfy couches and pillows to make sure that the victim is as comfortable as they can be, instead of having to go to an emergency room and sit there as a patient in an exam bay and wait for a nurse to come in and take care of her. They can be there potentially from anywhere from 2 to 5 or 6 hours, maybe more, depending on how severe the incident was. So we want to make sure that they're comfortable with us while they're there. If it's something that happened after the 120 hours, it's not an automatic, we can't help them. It's something that needs to be taken into consideration with the nurse, and given everybody is looked at individually and see if it's something that we need to do a physical exam or not. Also know that when we do an exam, it may not have to be just an exam. It's not an all or none with our services. Maybe they just need to talk to a nurse. Maybe they don't need a physical exam. Maybe they just need to have some questions that they need to ask a medical professional. That's what we're there for. Maybe they need to come in and we'll work, if it's a domestic violence relationship, we'll work and try to help them get a TPO, because sexual assault happens in domestic violence as well. So depending on what they need is how we're going to tailor our care to that. All right, so that's the Sexual Assault Center kind of in a nutshell. We are here, like I said, 24/7 for those exams. We work hand in hand with law enforcement. Now, you do not have to report this to law enforcement. We have a non-report option. In the state of Georgia, a victim is offered a free medical exam regardless of their status. So none of our services ever cost the victim anything at all. If it happened a couple of days ago and they come in and they say, you know what, I just want to talk to somebody and get some medicine, because I don't know if he gave me something. Okay, we'll sit down and we'll talk. We'll kind of talk about the pros and cons of doing an exam and collecting that evidence. She might not want to report at that moment for many reasons. Perhaps she was threatened. If you tell anybody, I'm going to come after you. I'm going to come after your children. I'll do it again. There are many reasons why they don't want to report. What about the domestic violence situation where the abuser was a pastor? Pastors have been known to do bad things. Law enforcement officers have been known to do bad things. What if it's a law enforcement officer? What if he tells her after he's done, go ahead and tell who's going to believe you? I am the law. Go ahead and tell who's going to believe you. I'm a pastor. My church would never believe you that I sexually assaulted you. So there are a lot of reasons why they don't want to report. But the important thing is that we get them to us and collect the evidence. We can do it as a Jane Doe or a John Doe. We don't even have to put their name on the paperwork. But we go ahead and collect it so that we've got it. And per the state of Georgia law, we have to hold that for a year. And in those 12 months, the victim advocate is in touch with the victim and law enforcement. And they'll call the victim and say, hey, how are you doing? You've got about 8 months left of your 12 months to change your mind. How are you? Do you have any questions? At the end of those 12 months, that evidence can be destroyed. Legally, it can be destroyed, and it's gone. But what happens if 3 months later she says, I've changed my mind. I want to report. I want to go forward. I want law enforcement to go arrest him. I want to press charges. Well, if we never did the exam in the first place, I have nothing to go on. But if we did the exam and we have that kit, we've got it. Then all we have to do is tell law enforcement she's ready. Here's her name. Move forward. Go ahead and get it to the GBI crime lab. Let's see how we can help her. So they have a 12-month period to change their mind, and we have had victims change their mind. We had one say, you know what, I don't want to get him in trouble. I just want to make sure that I'm okay, that I'm not injured, I want the medicine, and I just told him that if he just leaves me alone, I won't report him. Well, he wouldn't leave her alone. He kept calling her, he kept texting her, he kept harassing her, So a few weeks later, she came to us and she said, that's it, I'm done. I told him to leave me alone. He won't. I want to move forward. Great. We got in touch with law enforcement. We let them know, hey, this case number, here's her name. Now go, do whatever you need to do for law enforcement. We're going to do what we have to do on our end. But we had the kid. Whereas if she had waited that long to come to us and tell us that she wanted to report and get an exam, it would have been too late. And a he said, she said, without any evidence is a hard thing to prosecute. But a he said, she said, with DNA evidence, that gives our law enforcement officers a lot more to work with. So they can come in as a J. Doe or John Doe. Now, let's talk about strangulations. Strangulation is something that we see in our sexual assaults as well as our domestic violence cases. Either way. There's some interesting information about this. So it's often referred to as the last warning shot because this is often what we see right before he kills her. Often a strangulation episode is something that he's either escalated or sometimes it's the very first time that he's ever laid his hands on her. And the next thing we know, we've lost her. It's called the last warning shot. This is something that impacts more than just the victim and their family. This impacts our law enforcement. Our cop killers are domestic violence stranglers. Our cop killers are the ones who statistically, more time than not, they are our domestic violence abusers, they are our stranglers. And here's some information from 2017 and 2018. This is the best predictor of future homicides and domestic violence relationships because after a victim has had something put on or around her neck the very first time, after one time, her likelihood of being killed by her abuser has now increased by 750%. Not 10%, not 50%, not even 100% more likely. You are 750% more likely to be killed by your abuser after the first strangulation episode. And there's a difference between strangulation and choking. Choking is when I eat a piece of something and I don't chew it quite well enough and I try to swallow it and I'm choking and I'm trying to get it out of my airway. It's an airway thing. I can't breathe. Strangulation, and it's important that we understand the word and what it means. It's a circulation issue. It is cutting off blood flow that has nice, rich nutrients and oxygen, and it cuts it off to the brain. And then once it gets to the brain, it cuts it off so that it can't drain back out. And we have an increase in pressure in the brain. fear on the back, or sometimes they do it like top and bottom. It's how they're feeling later. How do you feel? Is a weight lifted off? However they want to describe what they're feeling, it's a very therapeutic thing for them. And it's extremely impactful. So, and we have some out there from children. I believe there was one I hung up this morning, was like a 3-year-old. So it's truly very touching to see them and how they express themselves in the art on the t-shirts. So I encourage you to go out and look at the t-shirts before you leave today. Anything else? All right, we're good. Thank you so much for coming today. We appreciate you.